At first glance, the Ford Anglia should have been the wrong answer to every question in American drag racing. It was tiny, British, cheap, narrow, short, and by the end of the 1950s, examples could be found in American junkyards for less than $100. Yet by the middle of the next decade, that same little economy car had become one of the most dangerous-looking and unexpectedly effective weapons of the gasser era. The Saturday Night at Lions Associated Drag Strip in Wilmington, California, around 1966 explains why. The grandstands are full. In one lane sits a 1948 Ford Anglia with a wheelbase of only 90 inches. Its nose is raised high. The front tires look almost comically small, and the rear of the car rests on huge wrinkle wall slicks. Through a rough opening in the hood rises a supercharged big block Chevrolet, making somewhere beyond 700 horsepower. The entire car weighs roughly 2,000 pounds. Nothing about it looks reasonable. Then look at the other lane. There's a 1941 Willys Coupe, the kind of car that had already spent years defining supercharged gas racing in America. Willys teams had dominated the category for much of the previous decade. Their cars looked purposeful, aggressive, and familiar to anyone who followed the sport. The Anglia looked like a British grocery car that had been attacked by a race shop. The starting sequence came down. Both cars left, and the Anglia either stayed beside the Willys or beat it. That was enough to send a crowd into chaos. The important question was never simply whether the Anglia could win. The more interesting question was how something that had failed so completely as an automobile became so perfectly suited to drag racing. To answer that, the story has to move backward nearly 20 years. In 1948, Ford of England wanted a larger share of the North American market. The company had a small, inexpensive car that sold acceptably at home, and executives believed there might be an American audience for economical transportation as well. Volkswagen had already shown that inexpensive foreign cars could find buyers in the United States. So in the spring of 1948, Ford began importing the Anglia through selected Ford dealerships in the United States and Canada. The price was below $1,000. Fuel economy was said to be around 40 miles per gallon. The car was simple and inexpensive to maintain. On paper, the plan made sense. American buyers disagreed. Post-war America wanted size, chrome, horsepower, comfort, automatic transmissions, large interiors, and the feeling that a car contained enough steel to last forever. The Anglia offered almost the opposite. Its wheelbase was only 90 inches. Its body looked like a reduced-scale pre-war Ford. Next to the large American machines filling showrooms, it seemed old-fashioned and almost toy-like. Ford expected more than 12,000 sales in the first year. It reportedly managed only about 3,500. The market did not improve. Within a few years, 2-year-old Anglias could be bought for roughly $250. By the late 1950s, unwanted examples were appearing in junkyards for under $100. Across the entire North American import period from 1948 through 1953, total sales reached only about 25,000 cars. Then the program ended. As a road car, the Anglia had become one of Ford's most conspicuous failures in the American market. As a drag racing platform, that failure was about to become an advantage. The reason was hidden inside the NHRA rulebook: gas coupe and sedan competition. The category's racers, simply called the gassers, was built around cars running on gasoline rather than methanol or nitromethane. The class existed from roughly the late 1950s until 1972 and reached its most famous period in the early 1960s, during what came to be remembered as the Gasser Wars. What made the system unusual was the way the cars were classified. The rulebook did not simply group them by engine displacement, body style, or elapsed time. Instead, the critical number was weight divided by cubic inch displacement. Take the race-ready weight of the car with the driver aboard. Divide that by the engine's displacement. The resulting pounds per cubic inch figure determined where the car belonged. Naturally aspirated machines were divided through classes, such as A/gas down through F/gas. Supercharged cars occupied divisions including AA/GS and the other blown gas classes. The lower the weight-to-displacement ratio, the more serious the class. That created an obvious engineering incentive. If two racers wanted to use similar engines, the one who could build the lighter legal car had a major advantage. The entire gasser world, therefore, became a search for low weight. Racers moved through all kinds of closed-body platforms. Full-size pre-war sedans gave way to lighter choices. Tri-5 Chevrolets, Henry JS, and eventually Willys coupes became part of the progression. For a time, the Willys was king. The American Willys coupes, built from 1933 through 1942, weighed around 2,200 pounds and could accept enormous amounts of horsepower. Cars associated with Stone, Woods and Cook, and Bajaj Mazmanian became some of the most famous machines in drag racing. By the early 1960s, the strongest blown Willys combinations were already running in a 9-second range, close enough to contemporary nitromethane top fuel cars to make the gas class's major attractions. But 2,200 pounds left room for someone to ask a dangerous question. What if the body could be even lighter? A 1948 to 1953 Ford Anglia weighed about 1,665 pounds in factory form. That was roughly 535 pounds less than a Willys coupe. In a racing system defined by weight-to-displacement mathematics, 1,000 pounds was enormous. Consider the example used by Anglia racers. With a 327 cubic inch small block Chevrolet, an Anglia in race trim could land around 6.1 pounds per cubic inch, placing it solidly in A/gas territory. Put the same 327 in a 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air weighing around 3,000 pounds, and the figure moves to roughly 9.17 pounds per cubic inch, dropping the combination into a slower class where competitors could use substantially larger engines. The Anglia was not merely light. It changed the equation. Then there was its 90-inch wheelbase. The famous nose-high gasser stance was not created only for appearance. Racers were trying to move weight onto the rear tires during acceleration. A short wheelbase made that transfer more dramatic. When the driver hit the throttle, the short Anglia could rotate backward aggressively, plan its rear slicks, and use the available power with extraordinary violence. Better rear tire loading meant better traction. Better traction meant better 60-foot performance. And better launches won races. The disadvantage was equally obvious. A 90-inch wheelbase car with large horsepower, a raised front suspension, skinny front tires, and enormous rear slicks was not a car machine at speed. Drivers would later describe the basic experience in much less mathematical terms. The Anglia could be terrifying. By the early 1960s, however, racers had already recognized the combination: extremely low weight, extremely short wheelbase, and junkyard-level purchase prices. Only one major obstacle remained. NHRA would not let them fully use it. Before 1963, the Anglia ran into two separate problems in the rules. The first was wheelbase. Most accounts put the minimum around 94 inches. Though the exact requirement appears to have changed between editions of the rulebook, the Anglia measured 90. That alone made it ineligible. The second problem was nationality. Gas coupe rules had required eligible bodies to come from an American automobile manufacturer. The Anglia came from Ford of England. So even before the first engine was installed, the little car was disqualified twice. The interesting part is that NHRA already seemed aware that the situation was becoming difficult to defend. The 1962 rulebook included language acknowledging that some foreign coupe and sedan bodies fit the spirit of gas competition better than sports car classifications. If they satisfied the remaining requirements, including wheelbase, they could potentially compete accordingly. Racers were clearly pressuring the edges of the system. In 1963, NHRA changed the rules and opened the door to foreign cars in the gas classes. But the Anglia did not receive complete freedom. The 1965 rulebook, reflecting the rules established in 1963, specifically accepted 1948 to 1953 English Ford Anglias, even though they failed to meet the minimum wheelbase requirement. Then came the restriction. Engine installations were limited to small block Chevrolets or equivalent combinations in the 265, 283, 327 range, and similar sizes. Superchargers were forbidden. NHRA had admitted the Anglia while simultaneously preventing it from entering the most prestigious blown gas categories. The Willis teams could continue using supercharged combinations in AA/GS. The Anglia could compete naturally aspirated in classes such as A/gas and B/gas, but the biggest engines and blowers were off limits. There was, however, another English Ford that exposed the logic of the rule. The Ford Prefect used the same basic family of components, but had a 4-door body and a 94-inch wheelbase. Those extra 4 inches changed everything. The Prefect could meet the wheelbase requirement and compete in categories unavailable to the shorter Anglia. Ohio George Montgomery, already a 3-time national champion and one of the most accomplished gasser racers in the country, campaigned a Ford Prefect known as the first gasser passer before eventually becoming closely associated with his famous 1933 Willis. The Prefect proved the concept. The Anglia still had to work within its special limitations. One of the men who mastered those limitations was Johnny Loper of Phoenix, Arizona. Loper operated Loper Speed Shop and raced a 1948 Anglia powered by an injected 327 cubic inch small block Chevrolet in A/gas. He became so dominant that racers called him the king of A/G. This was not beginner's luck. Loper had already won 3 NHRA national championships in other cars before building his Anglia program. He understood exactly what the weight to displacement rules rewarded, and he pushed the little English body as far as the legal combination would allow. This success created another measure of dominance. Other teams began building Anglias specifically to beat him. Among them were Jim Fireball Shores and Skip Hess in Southern California. Their goal was simple: defeat Johnny Loper. They had Don Long, already emerging as one of California's respected chassis builders, construct the foundation for their car. For power, they used a Hillborn-injected 375 cubic inch small block Chevrolet, stretched as far as practical within small block architecture while remaining within their intended class strategy. The result was serious. At Half Moon Bay, Shores and Hess established an A/gas national record of 137.4 miles per hour. For an unblown small block car of the period, that was an extraordinary speed. Then Chevrolet changed the escalation in 1965. The new 396 cubic inch big block arrived. Drag racers immediately saw the possibilities. More displacement meant more potential power, and Shores and Hess wanted to find out what an Anglia could do without NHRA's restrictions. Their answer was to race under NHRA sanction. There, the Anglia was not trapped by the same wheelbase and engine limitations. The team installed a 396 big block Chevrolet, topped it with a 6-71 supercharger, and aimed for AA/gas supercharged. During the conversion, Skip Hess asked painter Jack Burr to add 2 words to the supercharger scoop: "Ak Motor." The phrase was meant to describe the big, heavy Chevrolet engine in contrast with the smaller, more elegant small block. He escaped the car almost immediately. Rat Motor became one of the enduring nicknames for the big block Chevrolet throughout drag racing and hot rodding culture. According to the story preserved around the Shores and Hess Anglia, that phrase began on this car in Southern California in 1965. The Anglia was no longer merely exploiting a class formula. It was changing hot rod language. At roughly the same time, Ed and Ray Kohler were following a similar path with the Anglia that became the most famous of them all. They called it King Kong. It drove it. Ray was deeply involved in building and developing the car, while George Ritting performed chassis work according to the account. King Kong began as a small block machine. Then the escalation followed the same logic seen elsewhere. When big block power became available, it received a big block. When supercharger technology offered more, it received a blower. Because HRA rules allowed the combination to run without the same Anglia restrictions, that became one of its main competitive homes. Match racing mattered even more. Lyons Drag Strip in Wilmington became home territory for the car, and spectators came specifically to see the mismatch. A 90-inch wheelbase British economy body was racing against the best blown gas cars in America. That contradiction was the show. The Anglia's national event reputation was also growing elsewhere. Gene Altizer of Arlington, Virginia, brought a 1951 Anglia powered by Chevrolet small block into ace/gas competition. He won the class. Then he continued through Middle Eliminator, where class winners met competitors from other categories. Altizer advanced all the way to the final. Waiting there was Ohio George Montgomery in a supercharged 1933 Willys. The two cars were not mechanically equivalent, but elimination racing put them together anyway. Montgomery caught the Anglia and won. Yet the result that mattered was how far Altizer had gone. In the first eligible nationals around the period when the rules opened the door, a small block Anglia had reached the Middle Eliminator final against one of the strongest blown Willys combinations in the country. The message was obvious. The Anglia formula worked. 2 years later came another result that captured the entire gasser philosophy. At the 1965 U.S. Nationals, Altizer returned with his Anglia. In one round, he faced Eddie Sharman in a 1965 Mercury Comet. This was not a junkyard privateer. The Comet was a factory-sponsored experimental race car connected with Ford's Total Performance program and fitted with specialized 427 high-riser equipment beyond what an ordinary racer could simply buy from a local parts counter. For administrative reasons at the Nationals, technical officials had reclassified Sharman's car into ace/gas. That put the factory-developed Mercury opposite Altizer's Little British car. Altizer won. A body that could have been bought in a junkyard for less than $100 only a few years earlier defeated a purpose-developed racing machine backed by one of the largest automobile companies in the world. Few results better explain why people remember the gasser era. But Southern California did not own every important Anglia story. In Columbus, Ohio, Rick Stickle and Bob Riffle built one of the most successful Anglia programs ever seen at NHRA national events. They were working men, not major factory stars. Stickle worked at a Lazarus department store. Riffle worked for Western Electric. They acquired a 1948 Anglia from a friend, Rocco Rossington, who had stored the car in a garage on Parsons Avenue in Columbus. The race car was developed at Gilman Kirk's Rod Shop, one of the Midwest shops gaining respect in the sport. Their formula remained relatively straightforward. Small block Chevrolet, 4-speed manual transmission, careful preparation. Under NHRA's rules, the small block restriction that limited the Anglia also helped level the field, and Stickle and Riffle learned how to use it. At the 1967 U.S. Nationals in Indianapolis, they won B/gas. At the 1968 NHRA Winter Nationals in Pomona, they won C/gas. At the 1968 U.S. Nationals, they won again. A strong B/gas time slip showed 10.54 seconds at 128.2 miles per hour. For a naturally aspirated small block car, those numbers were highly competitive. Riffle later went on to build engines for Richard Petty's NASCAR operation. Stickle returned to department store work for the short period when they were racing the Little Anglia from Columbus. However, they became one of the most successful national event Anglia teams of the entire era. Back in California, the unrestricted cars were reaching another level. By 1966, King Kong had recorded a world record elapsed time of 9.23 seconds. Contemporary top fuel dragsters, the fastest machines in the sport and burning nitromethane, were in the 8-second range. The Kohler brothers have pushed a tiny gasoline-burning British sedan to within roughly a second of the fastest fuel cars in drag racing. Then came January 1967. At the Winter Nationals, Ed Kohler and King Kong reached the Super Eliminator final against defending champion Hugh Tucker and his proven 1928 Chevrolet AA Super Roadster. Tucker was not an easy opponent. King Kong ran 9.42 seconds at 145.63 miles per hour in one. The Anglia left the event as the Super Eliminator champion. Results like that forced everyone to rethink what the little car could do. At approximately the same time, NHRA finally began removing the engine and supercharger restrictions that had limited sub-94-inch cars. Sources are not completely consistent on the exact moment, placing the change around 1967 to 1968. Eventually, the Anglia could use the same basic weapons that had made the Willys famous. Big blocks, superchargers, maximum power, and that freedom arrived at almost the worst possible moment. By the time NHRA finally took the restraints off the Anglia, the gasser era itself was beginning to unravel. The threat did not come from one new rule. It came from another round of racing evolution. The same builders who had pushed production body gas cars toward more radical construction began creating something even more specialized: short wheelbase, rail-like chassis beneath lightweight, flip-up fiberglass bodies that only loosely resembled production automobiles. By 1966, these machines were appearing regularly at match races. They looked strange enough that spectators began calling them funny cars. The name stayed. More importantly, the stars moved. Stone, Woods, and Cook, the team behind perhaps the most famous Willys gasser, left gas competition for a fuel-funny car at the beginning of the 1967 season. Big John Mazmanian followed the movement into fuel-funny car racing in 1968. Ohio George Montgomery eventually exchanged his Willys formula for a fiberglass fastback Mustang. Skip Hess became involved in a 427 SOHC Ford-powered Mustang with Tom, the Mongoose McEwen. The Kohler brothers sold King Kong in 1968. The migration happened quickly. The gasser class did not simply lose cars. It lost talent, money, experimentation, and star power. King Kong's own later history shows how quickly a race car can move from headline machine to historical artifact. The Kohlers sold it to Chuck and Joe Pacini. They renamed the car Showdown and continued racing it successfully under the major sanctioning environments described in the period. After that, it passed through multiple owners. Its identity became less clear. Its significance began to disappear. Eventually, Carlos and Mary Sardina acquired the car and committed to restoring it properly. They tracked down George Breeding, associated with the original chassis work. They found Ed Kohler. They researched photographs and details from the car's competitive years and reconstructed King Kong in the form that made it famous. In 2002, at the Hot Rod reunion in Columbus, Ed Kohler was reunited with the Anglia he had driven during its greatest years. In 2010, NHRA named King Kong among 33 of the nation's most historic gasser cars. Its importance was also represented in miniature. A 1:25 scale model created by Barry Price was displayed at the Wally Parks Motorsports Museum in Pomona, where the associated curatorial sentiment was simple. A collection of historic drag cars would not be complete without an Anglia. By then, finding an original body had become difficult. Ford of England had sold only about 25,000 Anglias in North America between 1948 and 1953. Many have been scrapped. Others have been crushed, driven into the ground, modified, abandoned, or consumed by decades of ordinary use and racing. The source cites an estimate from Dean Kirsten of Anglia Obsolete that roughly 2,400 examples of the relevant Anglia generation survive in any condition. That limited supply helps explain why Anglia gassers became a passionate niche rather than a huge movement. The broader gas classes officially lasted until 1972. By then, the landscape of drag racing had changed. Pro stock had arrived in 1970. Competition Eliminator was becoming part of the new structure, and the old gasser identity was disappearing from the national stage. The Anglias that had once terrorized Lyons, Irwindale, Indianapolis, and other tracks were increasingly becoming nostalgia cars, stored projects, museum pieces, forgotten racers, or barn finds. But their importance is larger than one class. The Anglia represented an extreme expression of a motorsport principle that never disappears. Winning is not always about having the biggest engine. Sometimes it is about understanding the rules better than everyone else. The gasser system was designed to balance competition through weight and displacement. The Anglia attacked that equation from the opposite direction. Find the lightest legal or nearly legal closed body. Use the largest engine the rules permit. Exploit the short wheelbase for traction. Let arithmetic and physics do the rest. The result was so effective that NHRA wrote special restrictions around the car before eventually allowing it to compete more freely. And the people doing this were not all wealthy professionals or factory-backed stars. Ed and Ray Kohler were Southern California racers developing a car through shops and match racing. Rick Stickle worked retail. Bob Riffle worked for Western Electric. Gene Altizer came out of Arlington, Virginia, with a small regional operation. Johnny Loper ran a speed shop in Phoenix. Shores and Hess built around the same basic inside. They took one of the least desirable cars in post-war America, a commercial failure that had once depreciated to junkyard prices, and converted it into one of the most feared and loved drag racing platforms of the golden era. A few genuine Anglia gassers still appear in nostalgia competition. The Southeast Gassers Association has seen Anglia entries. They appear at the Glory Days event at Byron Dragway in Illinois. They show up at the March meet at Famoso Raceway in Bakersfield. They will never be common because the original body supply makes that impossible. But the spectacle is immediately recognizable. A tiny English body rolls toward the starting line. The rear slicks are enormous. The front tires look impossibly small. The nose sits high. The engine comes up. The car leaves. Weight moves backward. The front wheels lift, and the short chassis subtly looks as if it is trying to climb out of the track. For a moment, the same visual contradiction that packed the stands at Lions in 1966 appears again. Something this small should not be this fast. Something this awkward should not work this well. Something America rejected as transportation should not have become a giant killer. But that is exactly what happened. The Ford Anglia failed almost completely as the inexpensive British car Ford hoped Americans would buy. Then drag racers discovered that the same qualities that made it undesirable on the street, small dimensions, low weight, short wheelbase, cheap used prices, were almost perfect inside the strange mathematics of the gasser rulebook. America did not want the Anglia as a road car. It wanted to watch the Anglia beat cars twice its reputation. For a machine that could once be found in a junkyard for less than $100, that is a remarkable second life.